Forget the golden pharaohs and their serene gods. History, when it's honest, is a catalog of human filth, and no chapter is more sickening than the one Egypt tried to erase. This is the story of their most depraved sexual secret, a widespread horror that forced the highest echelons of society into a desperate, humiliating defense against the ultimate taboo, the routine rape of their dead. This is not about gods. This is about the monsters who wore the aprons of priests, the men entrusted with the sacred passage to eternity, who secretly turned their holy workshops into private brothels for the deceased. They were the jackals lurking behind the veil of piety, waiting for the bodies of noble women to be delivered to their tables, not to preserve them for the afterlife, but to defile them in the silence of the tomb, satisfying a lust so foul it has no name. Officially, it was called the Wabet, the pure place. The irony is sickening. In reality, it was an isolated den of vipers, a place where ordinary mortals feared to tread, located on the edge of the desert, where the world of the living bled into the kingdom of the dead. The air, thick and still, was saturated with a nauseating mix, the sharp chemical bite of natron, the sweet resins meant to mask the stench, and beneath it all, the unmistakable, cloying odor of cooling flesh. This miasma seeped into the skin and hair, haunting the embalmers even in their dreams, a constant reminder that they were not like other men. This work didn't just harden a man. It burned his soul to ash, leaving only cold cynicism. A special embalmer's gaze was gradually born, a look that could see a living, breathing person and instinctively strip them down to their components, bone, muscle, and organs to be harvested. The sanctity of the human form vanished, replaced by a butcher's pragmatism. The sacred hymns, muttered by a lector priest in the corner to guide the soul, devolved into meaningless background noise, a hollow drone against the wet, visceral sounds of their craft. In their hands were the tools of absolute power, the long bronze hook to scramble the brain into a liquid mess to be drained through the nostrils, the sharp obsidian knife for the single, precise incision in the abdomen. This was not merely the power over dead flesh, but over the deceased's very eternity. They held the keys to the afterlife in their blood-stained hands, a fact that granted a sense of dominance stronger than any drug. It was an intoxicating power, wielded in silence over a subject that could neither consent nor protest. And this was a closed, hermetic society. The master embalmers, the hairy seshta, or masters of the secret, held their apprentices on a tight leash of fear and dependence. They alone knew the most effective techniques and the most powerful incantations. To speak out against a master, to report a transgression, would mean the end of one's career, exile from the only caste that would accept you. Thus, a conspiracy of silence was born, cemented by shared filthy secrets and the cold realization that the laws of man did not apply in the House of the Dead. When the Greek historian Herodotus stuck his curious nose into Egyptian affairs, he, unlike the locals, was not bound by sacred awe or patriotic silence. He was an outsider, a man of logic confronting a world steeped in what he saw as grotesque superstition. His mission was to document, and in doing so, he became the ultimate whistleblower, recording a truth so vile that the Egyptians themselves tried to bury it deeper than any pharaoh. His lines in the histories are not just an observation. They are a cold, precise indictment delivered with the casual brutality of a man reporting an undeniable, albeit disgusting fact. He doesn't whisper or hint. He lays out the charge with chilling clarity. The bodies of beautiful and high-status women were not immediately handed over to the embalmers. A strange, seemingly counterintuitive delay was enforced. For 3 or 4 days, the corpse remained with the family. Herodotus then provides the reason, a single sentence that obliterates the myth of sacred duty. This was done so that the embalmers should not have intercourse with them. He presents it not as a wild rumor, but as an established, necessary protocol, a standard operating procedure against systemic depravity. And to crush any doubt, he anchors his claim with a specific, sordid anecdote that must have been a notorious scandal at the time. "For they say," he writes, "that one was caught in the act of having intercourse with a freshly dead woman, and his fellow craftsmen informed on him." This isn't just a story of perversion. It's a story of a completely rotten micro-society. The betrayal wasn't born from a sense of justice. One can easily imagine the real motive: a squabble over money, a professional rivalry, or simple, spiteful jealousy. It paints a picture of a viper's nest where even criminals turn on each other. And the only reason this particular act of evil came to light was because of another, pettier evil. This short passage forces us to confront the true horror of the situation. It wasn't the state or the temple that protected the dead. It was the grieving family forced into a horrific choice between two desecrations. On one hand, the natural, inevitable putrefaction of a loved one's body. On the other, the deliberate, predatory violation by a human monster in a sacred apron. They chose decay. They chose to let the body bloat and discolor, finding the passive horror of nature preferable to the active evil of man. This wasn't a custom. It was a desperate last-ditch defense in a system that had utterly failed to protect its own. To dismiss this account as a cultural misunderstanding is an act of intellectual cowardice, the preferred tactic of historians who wish to keep their sanitized version of the past intact. These apologists for ancient Egypt will tell you Herodotus was a gullible Greek, peddling xenophobic slander. They will propose alternative, rational theories, that the delay was for ritualistic purposes, or perhaps to allow rigor mortis to pass. This is a convenient, comfortable lie, designed to soothe our modern sensibilities. It is also pathetic nonsense. The grim logic of the situation points to a far filthier and far more human truth. Let's dissect these excuses. Slander and gossip are typically vague. A hostile rumor might claim that Egyptian embalmers are depraved. But Herodotus provides a shockingly specific detail: a 3 to 4 day delay, applied only to a specific class of women, the beautiful and powerful, for a single, explicit reason. This is not the shape of a generalized smear. It is the shape of a specific, targeted policy. Furthermore, in the searing Egyptian heat, delaying the process only makes the embalmer's work harder and more disgusting. The body enters a state of rapid putrefaction, bloating and liquefying. Any supposed technical benefit is vastly outweighed by the repulsive reality. The simplest explanation, the one offered by the source himself, remains the most logical. The protocol was a direct response to a known sexual threat. The existence of this rule is, in itself, a confession of profound societal failure. A healthy, just society deals with such abominations by hunting down the perpetrators and making a horrific public example of them. They would be flayed, impaled, burned. Their punishment a clear deterrent. But the society Herodotus describes does something far more insidious. It creates a workaround. It doesn't solve the problem. It quietly manages the symptoms. It tacitly admits that the disease is too deep, the perpetrators too insulated within their unclean caste, to be truly eradicated. The state and the temple were powerless or unwilling to cleanse their own sacred institutions, so they offloaded the burden of protection onto the victims' families in a nauseating act of bureaucratic cowardice. This is the grim principle of no smoke without fire, taken to its most extreme. Such a ghastly, humiliating precaution doesn't arise from a single, isolated incident. It arises from a pattern. The one embalmer who was caught was simply the one who was clumsy, unlucky, or foolish enough to have a rival who would rat him out. For everyone who was exposed, how many more were cleverer, quieter, and more patient? This rule is a ghost, a silent testament to countless unreported violations. It is the ultimate proof that the Egyptian elite knew their dead were being preyed upon, and this grotesque waiting period was the only pathetic defense they could devise. How does such a specific, vile depravity take root in a human mind? To find the answer, we must look beyond simple criminality and into the very heart of Egyptian theology. For it was their most sacred story that provided the ultimate, blasphemous loophole. The foundation of their entire belief in resurrection, the Osiris Myth, is at its core a tale of divine necrophilia. After the god Osiris is murdered and dismembered, his wife Isis reassembles his corpse. Finding his phallus missing, she fashions a new one, mounts his lifeless body, and through this grisly act of sexual magic, conceives their son, Horus. This wasn't just a quaint story. It was the central pillar of their faith. It established a terrifying precedent. The act of sex with the dead was not an act of violation, but the ultimate act of creation and rebirth. It was the master key that unlocked the door to the afterlife. And the men who worked in the embalming workshops were steeped in this mythology every single day. They were not just technicians. They were ritual players in a drama of death and resurrection. The endless, droning hymns, the symbols painted on the walls, the very purpose of their craft, all reinforced the idea that they stood at the nexus of sex, death, and divinity. This created a dangerously warped psychological landscape. The ancient concept of imitatio Dei, the imitation of the gods, could take on a truly sinister meaning in the embalmer's den. A man in the grip of his own darkness could convince himself that his profane urges were, in fact, a form of sacred duty. He wasn't violating a corpse. He was playing the role of the goddess, magically bestowing the seed of life and fertility upon the deceased. It's the ultimate self-deception, a way to cloak a monstrous crime in a veneer of piety, transforming a sordid act of lust into a misguided, holy rite in his own twisted mind. This twisted logic was reinforced by the final, and perhaps most disturbing, step of the mummification of an elite male. The embalmers would often attach a prominent, erect phallus to the wrapped mummy. Imagine the sheer, uncanny horror of it. A dry, brittle, resin-soaked corpse, made explicitly and aggressively sexual. This wasn't just a symbol. It was a direct, physical instruction. The embalmer's final job was to make the dead man sexually potent. For a mind already teetering on the edge, this act could be the final push, the ultimate blurring of lines. The combination of a divine necrosexual precedent, a psychologically charged workplace, and the explicit sexualization of the corpse created a perfect storm. It provided a sacred excuse, a divine get-out-of-jail-free card for the conscience, allowing a man to believe he was not a monster, but merely a servant of the gods. The final refuge of the historical apologist is the silence of the archives. If this was truly happening, they argue, surely it would be mentioned in their laws, their religious texts, their court records. This argument is born from a fundamental misunderstanding of what Egyptian records were. Their writings were not objective history. They were instruments of propaganda, tools for maintaining cosmic order, or mayat. Hieroglyphs carved in stone were meant to project an eternal, idealized reality, to officially record that the sacred priests of the afterlife were systematically raping the dead, would not be record-keeping. It would be an act of cosmic self-sabotage, an admission that the very heart of their civilization was rotten. Such a truth was never meant for eternity. It was meant to be buried. We can see this conspiracy of silence in their most famous funerary text, the Book of the Dead. In the negative confession, the deceased soul stands before the gods and lists the sins they have not committed to prove their purity. They declare, I have not stolen. I have not committed adultery. But they never say, I have not violated the dead. Why is this specific abomination missing? The cynical answer is obvious. The priestly and scribal classes who wrote and curated these texts would never include a sin that so deeply implicated their own associated guilds. Its omission is not an oversight. It is a calculated act of professional courtesy, a redaction designed to protect the insiders of the death industry. Furthermore, any such accusation would have been handled by the temple authorities themselves. The powerful funerary guilds and priesthoods were a law unto themselves, a state within a state. An allegation against one of their own would not have resulted in a public trial. It would have been an internal affair, swiftly and silently contained, to prevent a scandal that could disrupt the flow of gold into the temple coffers. They wrote at length about tomb robbers because a tomb robber was an external threat. An embalmer rapist was an internal one, a cancer. And the official response was not surgery but a cover-up, pretending the cancer didn't exist. And why didn't the powerful families of the victims raise hell? The answer is the crippling power of shame. Imagine a nobleman, already shattered by grief, having to publicly declare that the corpse of his wife had been defiled. The scandal would be catastrophic, a permanent stain upon his family's honor for generations. In a society obsessed with purity and reputation, this was unthinkable. It was far easier, far more dignified, to adopt the disgusting secret precaution of letting her body decay than to have his family's name dragged through the filth of a public accusation. Their silence was not acceptance. It was the choked silence of the powerful made powerless, a scream of quiet desperation against a system so corrupt it forced them to become complicit in the desecration of their own loved ones. So we arrive at the verdict. There is no signed confession on a papyrus scroll, no body to exhume for evidence. The perpetrators are dust, and their secrets are buried with them. But history is not only about what is written. It is also about reading the shapes left by what has been deliberately erased. The silence from the Egyptian records is deafening, and the single, stark testimony from an outsider is the key that unlocks the entire conspiracy. The grotesque precaution of letting a loved one's body decay is the central exhibit. It is a scar on the face of history, and scars do not form without a wound. It is the ultimate proof, a desperate, pathetic measure that would never exist without a real, persistent, and terrifying threat. This truth is a necessary antidote to the romantic poison that so often infects our view of the ancient world. We are taught to gaze in awe at the pyramids, to marvel at the golden masks and the intricate theology of a lost civilization. But to do so without acknowledging the rot beneath the floorboards is to engage in a childish fantasy. The story of the embalmer's secret does not diminish the grandeur of Egypt. It makes it real. It forces us to see them not as mythical figures, but as human beings, capable of creating transcendent art and theology, and simultaneously capable of the most squalid depravity and cynical cover-ups. They were not magical. They were us. Ultimately, the most profound crime was not the act of necrophilia itself, but the institutional hypocrisy that allowed it to fester. The system was designed not to protect the dead, but to protect its own reputation. A quiet, disgusting workaround was preferable to a loud, cleansing justice. The silence of the grieving family, the silence of the official records, and the whispers from a lone Greek traveler all paint a damning picture of a world where institutions protect their own, and the victims are forced to bear the burden of shame. The powerful closed ranks, the secrets were kept, and justice was never even a consideration. This is not, then, merely a dark tale from a distant past. It is a timeless lesson about the nature of unchecked power. The embalmer's waybet is a metaphor for any closed institution where accountability is absent, and the subjects are rendered powerless, be it an ancient temple, a royal court, or a modern bureaucracy. It is a chilling reminder that the veneer of sanctity is often the most effective camouflage for the predators hiding within. Behind the golden masks and the sacred rites, the grin of the beast is always there. And that is the most enduring secret that history has to tell.